Hello and welcome back to the Data Privacy Lawyer. My name is Funmi Owolabi and I am the principal attorney at the firm. Today's review, we're going to be looking at cookies. So this is for an organization. I'm going to hover over products. So the reason I'm hovering over products is because whenever I am doing a review, I like to take a look at what types of data protection laws may be in scope. Now, I have an intake form. I'm planning to do a whole review of what my intake form looks like for clients because I think it's valuable to see what it is that a privacy lawyer is looking at, because the drafting of these notices that appear on the website, on your mobile applications, and within your products are very, very important. And one of the biggest foundations for privacy laws is something called transparency. You've got to be transparent about personal data, right? Now, the personal data you process on your website may be different to the personal data you process on a mobile application, right? And you've got to detail that and articulate that to the consumers because they have rights as it pertains to their personal data. That's why you have these data protection lawyers, right? At the beginning of my channel, I always reviewed products, but there's so much nuance that happens. And this is one of the reasons I want to go through my intake form, because I need to be able to understand your products very, very deeply in order to be able to give you advice in order for you to meet your obligations under the data protection laws. I hover over the products because it starts me thinking about what personal data elements may be in scope, right? If I go onto a financial institution's website, immediately some of the laws I'm going to start thinking about the GLBA and the FCRA, right? Because of the industry that they're in. So this may not affect the cookies, but I always like to take a quick look because it might provide some insight on what is being collected on the website. So that's my spiel about that. This is a cookie policy and it's US. This is wonderful, right? Many reviews on my channel, I have no clue about geography. And this particular organization has dictated that this cookie policy addresses US only, right? Now, why is that important? Because every geography has its own data protection law. There are rules on how a business can coordinate itself as it pertains to personal data based on geography. Now, if you operate in many geographies, and we know that this is US, right? So my discussion today is going to be about US obligations as it pertains to cookies. But many times when we do these reviews, it's not clear which geographies an organization operates in, provides its products and services, or processes personal data. So I love that they've dictated which geography they're in, because my review today is going to be on US obligations for organizations. Now, I'm intrigued about the other cookie notices they have in other geographies with far more restrictive data protection laws. And I've tried to do on my channel a good review of other geographies. I've got reviews on organizations that are headquartered in Canada, European Union, England. So you can take a look at those if you're interested. Well, the first thing I want to say is that cookies do constitute personal data, which is why we've always got these cookie notices and cookie policies on the site. The first thing I always try and tell companies is I think it's very important to articulate scope anytime you're drafting any type of privacy documentation or any public legal documentation. So on my channel, I've done AI terms of service reviews. I've done lots of AI documentation. Essentially, I've done a lot of reviews for documentation that are either extremely privacy focused or hinge upon privacy obligations. Now, the reason I've just explained that is because scope is very important, because as consumers, we need to understand whether or not it's even a policy or notice we need to be reviewing, right? This policy sets out information about this organization's use of cookies on the websites, right? So we already know the scope. This only applies if you are accessing the website. If in the event that this organization then has like maybe a mobile application or other types of products and services, then we know that this particular policy does not apply because this is only for the website. And it's very important for this type of sentence to exist at the beginning of any document so that consumers can know very quickly whether or not it's a document they need to read. In this policy, we use the term websites for this website and any other websites operated by Travelport. Again, another very important piece of information. Now, why does this matter? And I'm planning to do a whole video on my intake form because one of the questions I ask organizations is about their subsidiaries and affiliates. Why does that matter? In data protection terms, we think about concepts like a data controller and a data processor. That is very important from a legal obligation standpoint because data protection laws dictate certain activities for a data controller and certain activities for a data processor. So It's very important for organizations to articulate that, because it appears, based on my review of the sentence, there are other websites outside of the one we're currently on that are operated by this organization that fall within the scope of this cookie policy, right? So it's very important for consumers to know that in the event that they have something called a data subject access request, which is a right that many consumers have, particularly in the United States, that allow them to exercise certain rights as it pertains to their personal data. And we know that cookies are personal data, right? My chain of thought is, I also think it's very valuable to have a definition. Many consumers aren't familiar with the intricacies of personal data and what constitutes personal data, and sophisticated definitions that are generally known amongst other privacy lawyers. It's really important to add definitions because of the audience. Now, the audience generally, right? We just took a look at their products, the only modern retailing platform built for agencies. So they've got these products, right? So you have to think as an organization, are the intended audience going to be able to understand the nuances I've provided in legal documentation, right? So adding definitions is very valuable because most people don't know what a cookie is, right? They don't know the definition that's provided here. So allowing them that insight is very important. The other thing I really like about this policy is it's very short, right? It's not terribly long. And the reason that's valuable is because we go back to the audience discussion. Many consumers don't want to read hundreds and thousands of pages about what you're doing with personal data. I saw a statistic a number of years ago, and it said individuals sat down and read every single privacy notice and cookie notice associated with an organization. It would take thousands of years. Your audience want to know what you're doing with their personal data, right? And most of your audience are not going to be privacy lawyers. So it's really important to keep your notices succinct and short, but in a tone that they'll be able to understand, which is why I've drawn on these definitions. I really like definitions. Okay, the one thing that I thought was interesting is, okay, great, cookie consent. Now, we're not going to have time to go through the cookie consent. I'm actually going to quickly click it just to see what it is, because I didn't actually offer any consent when I logged onto the website. Now, I've been clicking this button a couple of times, but it actually hasn't led anywhere. So I think maybe it's being worked on right now. And so I think it's really important to offer that, particularly given that this particular site, first of all, says, how can you manage the cookies? It says you can do it with our cookie banner, which we were not presented with, right? And then they've also got a preference center, but as you can see, I can't even click on the button, right? I've just tried to click on it several times. So it doesn't work within the cookie notice, and it also doesn't work down below where they've got the button. So that's a revision that needs to be done, because in the United States, we have the opportunity to opt out of certain cookies. And we can see that there are certain cookies here, like targeting cookies, analytic and performance cookies, and then they've also got functional cookies, all of which are optional, right? And when things are optional, based on the data protection laws in the United States, we have the opportunity to opt out. But as we can see on this site, this button isn't working, right? And neither is this one. So we can't exercise our opportunity to consent to these cookies. Now, I don't know if these cookies are working as in when I am interacting with the website, but it's very important to present consumers the opportunity to opt out. And I really do love that this organization has articulated the geography, because as somebody that's reviewing this on the internet, I think it's valuable to be able to hone in on the actual data protection laws that apply to an organization. So I really hope you enjoyed this review. If you have comments or questions, leave them below, and I will see you in another one.